This week, we welcome Max Shier, Chief Information Security Officer at Optiv Security, to discuss technology rationalization in cybersecurity. In the leadership and communication section, bringing the boardroom to the cyber battlefield, navigating the CISO role, common pitfalls for new leaders, ask better questions to be a better leader, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Let's talk about something that's becoming increasingly important for enterprise companies worldwide, cyber risk management. Traditionally, cyber risk has been managed manually in silos, separate from the business's core operations. The future is about getting real-time risk insights benchmarked against your industry peers through automation. And CyberSaint's CyberStrong platform is leading the charge. CyberStrong is not just another point solution. It's a revolutionary platform. It's a quantified top-down risk approach where your unique cyber risks inform C-suite decision-making to identify your top 5 cyber risks and the controls to mitigate them. Sign up for your free cyber risk analysis by visiting securityweekly.com/cybersaint. Your customers' and employees' identities are your responsibility to keep safe. But who is helping you stay safe from identity-based threats? Identity is the key to getting security right. And with the right identity partner, so much more is possible for your business than you thought. From strengthening cybersecurity to increasing revenue to reducing inefficiencies and costs, Okta unlocks growth and new possibilities for its customers. Go to securityweekly.com/Okta to learn more about Okta and the company's commitment to leading the fight against identity attacks. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 355, recorded July 8th, 2024. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. I hope everyone had a great Independence Day long weekend. Joining me for this interview segment today are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Jason, it's been a while.
It's been a little bit, I know, with PTO and travel for work. It's great to be back, though. I think a lot's happened since my last. I mean, the Celtics won the NBA Finals. We're getting ready for Patriots to start their training camp here late July. I can't believe I'm already talking about training camp again. It's crazy.
Yeah, football's right around the corner.
Yeah.
Also joining me from Austin, Texas, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Matt. How's it going? Just trying to stay dry here and avoid the west side of hurricane, tropical storm. I don't know where we are right now, but yeah.
I think it was a level 2 hurricane when it hit, maybe-ish. Yeah, we'll see. No, not much weather up here in Fort Worth yet. Just a few sprinkles this morning, so nothing yet.
Yeah, it's been bad for Houston. I have some friends and family over there, but good over here in Austin.
All right, good. You're invited to InfoSec World 2024 at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort in Lake Buena Vista, Florida, from September 23rd to the 25th. Join top cybersecurity experts for this premier event. Save 25% on your pass by using code ISW24-SW25 when you register at securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2024. Don't miss out on this exclusive opportunity. Max Shier is the CISO at Optiv, the cyber advisory and solutions leader. He is a 23-year Air Force veteran, has more than 27 years of experience in all facets of security, including direct cybersecurity and IT experience in several technology and security domains. Prior to Optiv, Max held several leadership positions in the federal government and the defense industry base, with his most recent position as cybersecurity director at a large defense contractor where he was responsible for cybersecurity oversight and implementation of critical space-based national defense programs. Max, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. I appreciate you inviting me to the podcast. I appreciate it.
And thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So I got a little history. So I was at Accuvant back in 2004, which is one of the foundations. I was in Colorado for a long time, one exit away from the Air Force Academy. So I love bringing over companies and people that I've known for years and get an opportunity to bring their folks on and interview them. But we're going to talk technology rationalization. On average, companies, depending on your size, somewhere between 50 and 75 security vendors. I'm just curious, like how real, like how accurate is that study?
I would say it's actually pretty accurate. If you talk to most CISOs, they have a ton of tool sprawl, and in the past, it's you bring on a tool, you bring on a vendor to fix a certain use case that you have. There was no real, I guess, emphasis on platforms, which is a buzzword in the industry now. And there was really no integration efforts with different tool sets out there to make sure that you're leveraging what you have as far as licensing, et cetera. And I think as industry moves towards platforms, I think that number will improve. But right now, I am not surprised that the number is that high. I would say even internally for me, my tools are in the dozens. And before we went into the tech rationalization efforts, I was actually quite shocked when we did an inventory on what we were actually using for different use cases. And so, to your point, Gartner, 75 security tools, that's insane, right? But if you go to RSA, you go to Black Hat, and you go to I guess the hall where they have all the vendors there. I mean, there's thousands of vendors that you can go visit. And so it's not surprising that you're going to have that many tools. But I think tech rationalization is one of those things that you have to do nowadays, just because in this resource constrained environment, yeah, spending on cybersecurity may be improving, but there's still an emphasis on CISOs to save money where they can. And this is where tech rationalization is going to be a great tool for us to utilize, not just to lower the amount of tools that we have, but also save money in the process.
Yeah, I think the total number of security companies is almost 4,000. And just think about that number for a second, right? 4,000 security products. Company
Isn't that
has on
insane?
average 75. Like the choices are overwhelming. Also, forget about the rationalization. I mean, we're
Yeah.
obviously going to talk about how to address this, but it's a lot. It just seems like a lot of vendors in the space that you have to kind of get your arms around.
Yeah, and you really have to move past the marketing fluff and the buzzwords of the day, right? And it really is buzzwords of the day because it's constantly changing. So, buzzword of today is AI, right? Everybody's implementing AI and platforms, and that's the play for today. So you're going to see, a ton of vendors at RSA that are focusing on just AI. And I think, once you move past the marketing fluff and you get to really the use cases that you need, especially as a part of tech rationalization, you'll realize, you can really consolidate a lot of your tool sets into several larger platforms that, you know, can normally meet 95% of your use cases. And you're not having to dig through tiny vendors that solve one solution, one problem that you may have, especially as it relates to, something like AI and controlling AI within your environment. I think there's enough tools out there now to be able to meet those use cases for you. So I think, yeah, there's 4,000 security vendors, but how many of those are truly viable for your environment? And I think that's what tech rationalization helps with. And honestly, you have to go through there and do a review of the vendors that you are using because, there's a lot of cost associated with individual vendors that you're utilizing for individual use cases. And some of those may be mandatory for you. And in those cases, that's fine. But normally, consolidating into, some key vendors will definitely help out with price, tool sprawl, et cetera. And it really helps with your team with training, et cetera. And especially on tools that you're giving access to others like developers. If you're trying to secure your CI/CD pipeline and you have 5 different tools that you're giving accounts to for devs, I mean, what good is that, right? You have to train all of them, and then if you change a tool, you got to do more training, and there's more cost. So tech rationalization is one of those things that can really help you out, especially if you're giving accounts to others that have other stakeholders within that tool set.
Now, Max, we talk about this all the time here on the show. It's one of the say easy, do hard, right? In order to go through that process, you need to understand all of your assets within the entirety of your organization. What are some of the methods that you use to go through that, let's call it asset management exercise, where you can audit all of the security products, because they
Yeah,
may not necessarily be in your visibility, or you're not managing
that's
them
right.
as the CISO. So how do you go through that
Yeah.
process of really bringing the entire organization together to do that full-fledged audit?
Yeah, Jason, that's a great question. And I'll tell you, it's the first thing that any CISO should be doing when they take over a position, anyways, is a full
Mhm.
inventory. And to your point, there is shadow IT, there's shadow security out there. How do you get visibility on all of that? And I think this is where your security stack can really help you out. Whatever you're using for vulnerability scanning normally has a capability to scan for software inventories, et cetera, as well. That's a great way to get visibility on what's in your environment. Other security tools, such as cloud security tools, Wiz, Aqua, et cetera, will also give you some inventories on what you're using. Qualys Tenable for vulnerability scanning will give you visibility. So run a scan, see what's out there, make sure that you're inventorying all of those. And if you don't have, say, an application whitelist in place, try and get your arms around what's actually authorized in that environment, because there may have been exceptions that were made 5 years ago that you didn't have visibility on, or your team may not have visibility on because you've had some turnover, et cetera. It really is kind of going through that inventory just to see what's still needed and what can be removed, and then working with IT to make sure that you get that whitelist in
Mhm.
place, and then advertise that to the user base, right? So that way they know what's authorized, what's not, and that you have a good process in place to get something that's authorized if you do need something.
Do you find that?
When it comes to the
Oh,
security, I'm
sorry.
sorry, go ahead,
No, I
Jason.
didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say, do you find that relationships throughout the organization are important as well? Because I found
Yeah,
that there's so many. You talked about shadow IT, and how easy is it right now for a marketing team to fire up some level of marketing automation that may have some security capabilities within the platform, right? That you want to make sure that you're identifying, places where you can get better visibility. Uh, Do you use the relationship side too to kind of tease out some of that shadow IT slash shadow security functionality, or vendors that are out there as well?
yeah, you have to, right? And I think the CISO's job is not just a technical one. I think, in fact, if anything, it's mostly relationship building. You have to be able to work with the business to make sure that you're enabling the business. And if there's a hindrance, nobody's going to come and talk to you, right? You have to be that good partner of the business, so that way people are willing to come to you with a problem. So that way they know that you're willing to work with them and get them what they need to be able to do their job. And if it's not that service or that application, what else can you provide them that may already be authorized that can meet the same use cases? Because again, they may not have visibility on the full picture of what you have in your environment and what's already authorized. And so, as CISO, I think in today's environment, you can't be a speed bump, right? You can't be that roadblock. You have to be that enabler to be able to get people to come and talk to you. And I think, earning that trust is probably one of the first things as a CISO you need to go do, is get people to understand that you're here to help them, not hinder them, right? You're here to help the business make money. You're here to help them do what they need to do in their role, um, instead of just saying no all the time. Because if you say no, they're going to find ways to circumvent you, and I think that's a huge problem.
Thus, shadow IT and shadow security.
Exactly.
Right. And I mean, I think the relationship's going to be important because, Jason identified the first step in the tech rationalization inventory, right? You got to know what you have. But as you inventory all that, you're going to find overlap. And now I think the really interesting part of this is you've got to negotiate across the businesses on which tools you're going to keep and which ones you're going to get rid of, right?
Yeah, and that's, to me, that's probably the biggest piece of tech rationalization is inventorying what you have, and then understanding the capabilities that are associated with what you're using, and seeing if there's overlap, to your point. And if there is overlap, how do you consolidate into a singular tool, or a platform? And or is there something else that maybe you can move to that may be cheaper, but you get more capabilities that provide more functionality than what you're currently using? And I think the inverse of that is, do you have all of these capabilities that you don't need and maybe you're overpaying for it, right? That's the other piece. And I think a lot of people fail to realize that too. Are you buying a Ferrari, but you need a Toyota, right?
Right.
And, for me, I think the biggest piece is it is the tool that you've purchased working for you, right? And I think a lot of people listen to the marketers and they purchase based on what's being sold to them versus what they actually need. And so, when you do the inventory and then you start looking at capability overlap, for me, we started an RFP process that starts identifying the use cases as a part of capabilities that you need, whether it be cloud security, vulnerability scanning, or whatever, because there's a lot of overlap now with these platforms out there in industry. And you really need to understand what the current capabilities are and what they have in their roadmap too. Now, I'm not saying buy based on their roadmap because I think that would be, probably not in your best interest, especially if they don't deliver. But I will say, it's important to understand what capabilities they have now and what use cases you have versus what use cases, the sales team is trying to give you. And then purchase for your environment. And then understand what capabilities you have as far as overlap. So that way you can reduce the overlap. That saves you money, reduces training costs, et cetera, complexity, all those other things that come with reducing tool sprawl. But, to your point, the capabilities and mapping that out is extremely important. And for me, I'm a visual type of guy. So I like understanding, in a chart, what capabilities do I have? Where do I have overlap? And whether it be a pie chart or, pros, cons of each or whatever, doing it in some way, visual way, documenting that, I think is the most important, whichever way you want to document it. So that way you have that for people that are coming on board, you have it for IT, you have it for your senior leadership, and you can explain that to people that may not have full visibility on what you have in your environment.
I love that you
Yeah, I
went
think
down
that's
that path. I love that you went down that path because what you're doing is you're taking all of these key factors and you're giving it a point system. And at the end of the day, that may be your deciding factor when you're sitting down with other stakeholders, because you sit back and you say it's not just about feature functionality and future roadmap. It's also about scalability. It's about vendor support. It's about ease of use. It's about training. It's about economies of scale. And now you have this point system where you can say, this is why this platform can win the battle, right?
Yeah, and Ben, I know you have a comment here, so I just want to interject first. I will say that I think the biggest piece that's missing in a lot of these RFPs is ease of integration, right? A lot of people buy tools and they forget about the full integration of things. They get a either, a quick deployment or fast deployment or quick start or whatever you want to call them for like the 3 days that you get from the vendor for, a couple grand or whatever it is, but you're only 20% integrated, right? You may get some logs in Splunk or something like that, but where's the integration with ServiceNow? Where's the ongoing maturation services that go with it? And so I think, to your point, integration is one of those things that really people have to think about. And, that's a part of tech rationalization too. Are you fully integrating what you have? Are you fully utilizing what you have? In a lot of cases, the answer is absolutely not, right? Because you're not factoring in that integration work and that maturation work after the quick deployment.
Yeah, I was going to call it, you mentioned use cases, and I think one of the biggest things that I see people running down the road to failure is they approach it from what are the features and functions that you have, right? What's your tech do? What's the coolest stuff? What's the differentiator? And like, it really doesn't matter, right? Like, if you don't need that differentiator, like, why is it important to you? If you don't need that really cool feature, like, why is it on your list, right? Like, maybe start out with your use cases first, right? Start out with what you actually need. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Look for that solution as opposed to look for a solution in search of a problem, right? Which a lot of people go down and it's that shiny ball syndrome, right? They chase that new thing, that cool thing. You're not solving for that, right? Like, you've got a big problem that's staring you in the face, but you're not solving for it because you got distracted with something interesting. And so I think deciding your use cases, as Jason mentioned, like having that scoring system to try to figure out where you're going, and having a strategy, like, where are you trying to get to? Are you trying to put the best solution forward first, or are you trying to put a roadmap and a journey in place where you can get some wins on the board, create some successes, get buy off and agreement from other stakeholders in the org, and move that ball forward? I think that's, I see you shaking your head. I'm hoping you agree with it, but that's where I see like a lot of people go down the wrong road. And I think, when you're trying to do a rationalization project, you really need to look at that. Like, do you have a lot of feature and functionality that you're just not using at all, and it's shelfware and you're paying a lot for it?
Yeah, and that's right. And I think you brought up a great point, and that is strive for improvements, not perfection, right? Take that 3-year roadmap that you have and make sure that you bake in incremental improvements throughout time, right? That maturation. And to your point, maybe you don't buy the Ferrari now, but you want to get there. So you pick a platform as a part of your RFP process that has the capabilities that you need, but maybe you buy a lesser license right now. Maybe you don't need the platinum package, you just need the silver package for now. And then every year you move up in capabilities and you implement those, right? It doesn't have to be like an all or nothing process. It can be very incremental. And in fact, I think that's probably, in my eyes, the best way to go to make sure that you do it right. And so you don't want to take on this huge project if you know that you only have 3 months to go implement and the vendor is telling you it's going to take 9 months or 18 months or whatever, right? Like if you're ripping and replacing your IAM solution, you're not going to get that done in 60 days, right? That's going to be an extended project over an extended period of time that you need maturation baked into that because you have several different use cases. Even a company like Optiv, I mean, we're 2,500 employees strong, but 2,500 employees is quite a bit. That's a good medium sized company. And I'm not going to get that done in 60 days, right? It's probably going to be 18 to 24 months. And so, how do you bake in the increase in capabilities, you know, when you're not paying for the Ferrari now? Maybe you buy the Toyota now, and then you can upgrade to the Ferrari over a period of time.
Might have to start with a
Matt,
mini and kind of work your way up.
yeah. Right.
Start with a Yugo.
So Max, I mean, we talked a lot about, benefits of that consolidation process and building out that platform type strategy. If the CISOs ruled the world, we can make decisions with stroke of a pen, but unfortunately we don't, right? So ultimately you have to get stakeholders involved. You have to have decision makers involved. You have to have blessings from CFOs and CEOs and maybe boards and other C-level executives. With that business case that you have to bring to the table, it's not just about the savings and economies of scale and things of that nature. There's also, how do you mitigate the risk of going through, or risks, I should say, of going through a consolidation process? So what are some of the risks that you've seen? Disruption has risk, right? What are some of the risks of the business that you've seen? And what can CISOs do to start making other executives feel comfortable that they're going to be able to mitigate those risks?
Yeah, well, and I think any project really starts with talking to the stakeholders, to your point, and getting the right stakeholders involved. And really, that's where you as the CISO or you as a security professional have to understand the business to know who to go talk to. And if you don't know who to go talk to the senior leaders and say, hey, look, I have this project that I need to get done. Please assign somebody to this task so that way I can understand what your use cases are and what your risks are if we screw this up. Because I'll tell you, if you have a client facing environment that, thousands of clients are logging into and you implement a security stack item in there that messes up logins or something to where they can't get the information that they need, that's business interruption and that's a loss of money and income. And so, we have to be extremely cognizant of those risks, specifically to your point, where stakeholders can be there to identify those for us, and then before we start the project, go to senior leadership and say, hey, here's the risks that we've identified via the stakeholders and the POCs that you've provided us. Do you see anything else that may be of risk that maybe was missed? Right? And get one last sanity check before you embark on this project and start ripping and replacing stuff. And I think, the risks are obviously greater when you're ripping and replacing something completely, going to a new vendor or moving from an on-prem solution to a fully cloud solution, which we've done actually a few times now over the past couple of years that I've been here at Optiv. And yeah, there's some inherent risks that you really need to buy down on that. And I think a lot of people overlook professional services to help with that, or getting the right people involved to help with the deployment and implementation to make sure that you're doing it right. And a lot of people cheap out on that because licenses are expensive. And you can't rely on your own team to go do that stuff if it's a tool that they've never worked with before, or a service that they don't have training in, or if you're not hiring specialists to go do that stuff. And so that's something that you truly need to go consider. Can you invest in professional services? And if the company is saying, no, we can't afford that, what training can you get your team to help reduce some of that risk by swapping over to that solution, and make sure that as a part of the RFP process, you're fully factoring in all of the costs that are associated with that deployment, right? And that includes any of the unique use cases that are going to, add complexity to the deployment too. And I think, depending on the type of environment that you're in, there could be some significant complexity that has to be, bought down, deploying a new tool. And maybe it's an extended, deployment timeline, so that way you have some extended testing that you have, etc. But that all costs money, right? And so, I think all of that has to be factored in. And a lot of people, and I've ran into this issue myself. If you're moving to a cloud environment, what does that compute cost, right? What are the true cloud costs that you're moving to, right? Yeah, it reduces some administrative overhead, but if you have like super high compute costs, storage costs, etc., that's going to add some significant cost to the project and risk for that matter. If you're over significantly what was initially budgeted. So I think there's a lot of considerations there as it relates to risk, but I think, if you do your job and you do your work beforehand, I think a lot of that risk can be bought down and can be identified and reduced with mitigations before you even start. Because if you start the project and you're in the middle and you miss a use case that adds a lot of complexity and cost and uniqueness to your deployment, that could be a serious problem, right? And you really don't want that added cost, because you could really ruin the relationships that you have with the board, ruin the relationships that you have with the stakeholders and the business, and reduce your credibility as a part of that. And really, credibility as a CISO is extremely important, right? You want people to come to you. We already had this discussion about, having that confidence for people to come to you as an enabler to the business. And if you're not doing that right and you hurt that credibility, that's going to hurt you long term in trying to get your job done.
So, Max, does technology rationalization mean that best in breed is done? Like, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
right? I mean, we're talking about this rationalization. We're talking about platforms. Does that mean the ability for a CISO to build a best in breed set of solutions kind of gone?
I don't think so. I think it depends, right? And as a former government employee, I think it's easy to say it depends, right? It really depends on your environment. And I think, it kind of goes back, do you need that Ferrari or do you need a Toyota? Do you need that best of breed, right? Is it good enough? Is it half the cost? Maybe
Yeah.
at that point, good enough is good enough, right?
I'll throw
And
out a
maybe,
counterpoint there, because it's funny you asked that, Matt, because my question was going to be like, look, we talk about, tech rationalization, and we talk about, naturally you get to platformization. And I find the field littered with horror stories of platformization gone wrong, right? Like, dating myself, but I go back to Computer Associates, right? CA. And I go back to Network Associates, right? And the heyday when it was all going to be a platform, and that didn't work out very well for them. And so, now we there's some strong plays. Palo's obviously come to mind, right? Of somebody who's in that platformization side. But there's risk there too, right? Like, I mean, you put all your eggs in one basket in a platform, and the platform makes a bad decision, or CA is a perfect example of, like, buy something and you think it's going to go great, and yeah, it just doesn't go anywhere, and it kind of dies on the vine, or there's no development. So I think what you maybe get to, Max, is it's balance, right? Like, you've got to make the assessment of what's right for you and about the balance that you have to take into account. You agree?
yeah, I absolutely agree. And in fact, I think to your point, there's a lot of platforms out there that are not platforms, right? You're still logging into 4 different dashboards, 4 different tools to get to the same thing. But because it's a great marketing
Don't worry, we'll get
buzzword
there.
right now,
We'll build it eventually, 6 years from
yeah,
now.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, and to your point, I think there's a lot of platforms out there that have mediocre capabilities in tertiary type of
Yeah.
capabilities, right? So everybody's saying that they have cloud security capabilities now, but nobody's really doing it well except for the pure play cloud security people, right? And in fact, I think, when we did our RFP recently on cloud security, it was um, a lot of other players wanted to look at providing those capabilities, but they weren't as strong as the pure play cloud security folks. So,
Mhm.
to Matt's point, I think there's some best of breed right now, but it depends on the capabilities that you want to look at. But then there's other platforms that you can look at that maybe you don't need a full cloud security environment. It's good enough for now. You don't need all of these awesome capabilities that are going to blow you out of the water with AI built in, all this other stuff. But maybe it's good enough for now. Maybe mediocre is good enough. So Ben, to your point, I think it depends on your environment, and really, do you have the planning in place to show that it's meeting the use cases now and for the license period that you're purchasing? And that's why I mentioned the roadmap too. You may be purchasing a platform now that has some capabilities in the roadmap that you're looking to implement later, and the price is good now. The capabilities are good now that meets your environments now. Maybe that's a good play for you. And I think that's something that you really need to bake into that RFP process to fully understand what the platform provides, if it's truly a platform, right? Does it meet your use cases? And do the roadmap items meet your use cases in the future? And if that slips, is that going to hurt you? Or is that something that you're okay with, right? And I think all of those have to be considered as a part of a purchase.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important here is if you're going to go platform with best of breed, integration becomes very important, right? If you can't
Absolutely.
integrate the platform to these one-off solutions because you need that capability, it better integrate well or you're going to be in a world of hurt.
Yeah, and see, Matt, that's why I've always shied away. And you know this. We've been at this, you and I, for 6 years having this conversation, right? I'm about the ecosystem, not the platform.
Yeah.
If you can lock into my ecosystem, I could have a combination of best of breed, platform, right? In as a service type environment. The key is the ecosystem. Can you integrate into my ecosystem? And am I going to be able to adopt the tools to their biggest capability,
Yes.
right?
And Jason,
I mean, if I'm going to buy,
I was going to
go
say,
ahead.
and to your point, integration is key here. Can you support the integrations on an ongoing basis,
That's right.
right? To support that centralized piece, whatever you're integrating into, like if you're running Splunk, yeah, they're best of breed when it comes to integrations, right? For a SIEM. They have plugins for everything, right? They have integrations for everything. Or are you using another tool that may be new to market that doesn't have the integrations that you may suffer on, and you have to build custom capabilities
Right.
every single time you look to add a new tool?
Yeah, and there,
So
there's the
Max,
other
as we're
pivot on there, right? Which is, you mentioned Splunk, and I was thinking on the VM side of the house, like what happens when the price gets way too expensive, right? Can you pivot off of? Can you make a solution work for your company where long term you can figure out a strategy that works for you, it doesn't work for your vendor, right? It's got to be a partnership, and part of that is not only the tech and the integrations, but it's also the pricing structure and how that works, right, over time.
Well, you're investing, right? You're
Yeah.
investing in that product, and it's going to be expensive to move off of it. And I think what a lot of people fall into that trap on is that they're fully invested in one thing and they're fully bought into that one thing, and it's too hard to move off of it. And so when you get those massive price increases, and I know, a lot of people suffered when Cisco bought Splunk, right, for the lower tier pricing that increased. And that was, a lot of people suffered on that. And, I think everybody agrees Splunk can be quite expensive, but, when you're best of breed, you can charge expensive prices, right? But, to Jason's point, that integration is key, right? And if you can't integrate into your tech stack or your security stack, it's not worth it, right? And can you support it? Going back to my original point. So if you are ripping and replacing into something else, is it something that has to be highly customized? Because, your initial investment may be fine, but then you have to support it too, right?
Yeah, and a Microsoft E5 license is a great example of that too, right? Like you look at it, and like a lot of people make the decision, like, is it good enough? Like, do I really need a best in breed? And sometimes actually the tooling in there can be really good for what you want to do. It doesn't mean that it's not necessarily best in breed because it's part of a holistic platform solution. But yeah, it's a really hard argument, right? Like, if it works natively together well, if the integrations are actually done and the vendors supporting those technologies being merged together, it can be a big win. So I think you have to have an open mind and figure out what works for you and your company versus, Jason made a decision for his company. I'm just going to follow his path because it was right for him. Well, it may be a complete fail for you. Like, you've got to look at it with open eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this goes back completely to, does it make sense for you? Right. And I think a lot of people just listen to that marketing spiel and say, yeah, that's what I want. That's what I need. And I'm going to buy into that platform or that product or that, whatever they're selling, because that's what they're selling me is this greatest thing since sliced bread. Right. I don't need the greatest thing since sliced bread. I need what works for me. Right. And,
It's the
and
job
each
of marketing,
vendor
right?
is,
To convince
yeah,
you that
yeah,
you need
exactly.
it.
Yeah, and I will say it's hard for a CISO or a security professional to dig through the marketing fluff and the marketing BS that's out there nowadays. And so, a lot of what I tell salespeople is tell me straight up, give me um, an hour to look at your platform. I need a demo where you're showing me what my guys are going to see or my gals are going to see as a security operations analyst or as a security engineer doing an investigation, right? I want to see the product in action. I'm not going to go based off of what you're selling me or what the one pager says or whatever, right? I need to see it in action, and I want to see your tool meeting my specific use cases, and I want specific, answers to questions that I may have for my use cases. And so as a part of my RFP process, we do demos. We do, ongoing conversations between the salespeople, the SMEs, and my team to make sure that it's best meeting my use cases and the stakeholders' use cases. To Jason's point earlier, and then going from there, right? And Splunk is a great tool, great integrations. Maybe it's not best for your environment because you don't have the people to support it. You need something that's more plug and play, right?
You mentioned it there, like we talked about use case at the beginning. You've got to have that. Like that's really important. I mean, I can't speak to the number of vendors that come in and talk to me and say, "Hey, we want to pitch on this," and they just give the canned demo, right? I don't want the canned demo. What I want is here's what I need to see, and show me that you can do that, right? And customize the demo to my needs,
Yes.
wants, and
Yeah.
a fit
And
for the
and
environment.
specify the other tools in your environment to
Yeah.
them so that way they know what
Mhm.
they're having to integrate with, right?
Right.
If your ticketing system is ServiceNow, there's some build outs that you're going to have to integrate into ServiceNow because that is absolutely not plug and play, right? But if you have another ticketing tool, or maybe you're not using a ticketing tool for your security responses, maybe it's not important to you. But you have to give the vendor the full picture so that way they can come to you with a tailored solution for your environment and your use cases. And I will say it's okay to not understand or know every single use case that's important for you. Talk to other CISOs, talk to other security professionals, go to, do research on articles online, ask ChatGPT, what are some good use cases for these security capabilities so that way you can educate yourself on what's out there, right?
Or you can listen to Business Security Weekly.
That's right. Or listen to this podcast. I mean,
Tune
it's,
in Mondays.
I mean, there's so
Exactly.
many resources out there that you can dig into, and I know a lot of us don't have the time to do all the research. So it's important for the vendors to also say, hey, have you thought about this too? Right. And that's also a part of the RFP process that I have is tell me what you think is the best implementation for your tool. Tell me what's right. So that way I can see what you think a good implementation looks like. I don't have to base my decision off of that, right? But it's nice to see what good looks like. So in a lot of ways, I asked the vendor, I want to go meet their CISO, do a one-on-one with their CISO and say, hey, how are you using your tool internally? Show me what good looks like. You're drinking your own champagne, right? I want to see what that champagne tastes like.
Max, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was a great time.
Yeah, it was great. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.